All right. So good morning, everybody. We're here with Bruce Rawles and hi, Renee. Bruce Rawles and Lynn Johnson, and we are reading Absence from Felicity, which is a book by Dr. Kenneth Wapnick, all about Helen Schucman and her scribing of A Course in Miracles, but also about her and all the things that were so Helen. Let's see. Um, there we go. Can y'all see?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good. Anyway, so we left off on last Saturday, or last Saturday. I guess it looks like I'm in the middle of a paragraph, but it's the end of, is it the end of that section? I think we were going to go back. That's why I put
Yeah, I think going back a paragraph to where it's on to middle of, actually it's toward the top of page 21, the second paragraph on the printed version, which begins the persistent conflict, who she was.
There
There
we
it
go.
is. Yeah, that's probably a good place to pick up, to have a little overlap.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you want me to read? I will read.
Sure.
He's talking about Helen's life and her just, well here. The persistent conflict of who she was ran through Helen's entire life, as does a theme in a symphony. In undergraduate school, Helen wrote a composition, probably an exercise in creative writing, that dealt with a fish who wished to be a bird, and then, on being able to fly, wished he were a fish again, yet throughout retaining fundamental dissatisfaction with his lot in life. Though written in more than a slight tongue-in-cheek, beginning with its title, which was borrowed from Shakespeare's 29th sonnet, the short story reflects Helen's inability to make up her mind about who she was. It begins and ends with a cute note to her professor. He all alone bewept his outcast state. There is certainly some sort of explanation due you for this, but all I can say is that I felt it coming on for some time, and it was bound to happen sooner or later. I'll make it as short as possible. And I'm guessing that was the note that she gave to the professor. I'm not sure.
Apparently, yeah, that seems
Yeah.
like the case from the context.
It was bound to happen sooner or later. You were gonna find out sooner or later that I'm a nut.
You can tell her sense of humor from that. That's what. Yeah.
Yeah, I just imagine, because we'll get to know her more through
Mm-hmm.
this book. So, anyway, so you want to read?
Sure. So her composition begins with the title, "He all alone bewept his outcast state." Once upon a time, at the bottom of the ocean, there lived a sad little fish, and all day long he would sit on a rock and sing to himself in a melancholy way, something like this. "Oh, a bird he can fly way up to the sky, as happy can be. But a poor little fish, though he wish and he wish, must always stay down in the sea." Okay, and then there's a footnote here. It says, it's referring to something we read last week, which I think we may have already mentioned. It's talking about specialness. This is referred to in A Course in Miracles as our need for specialness, described briefly in the summary found in the appendix. So I think we might have read that last week. But anyway, so I'll go on. Now here's Ken's commentary until the next stanza of Helen's little poem here. He got sadder, and or maybe this is still the same poem. Oh, I see. She is mixing prose and poetry. So this is still Helen. This is now her prose between verses here. Okay, between poetic verses. Okay. He got sadder and sadder, and all the other little fishes began to worry about him, until one day they called a meeting to decide what they could do for him. And a kind of silver flying fish was so sorry for his sad little friend that he agreed to lend him his wings so he could try being a bird for a while and see how he liked it. When the unhappy little fish heard about this, he was so pleased that he very nearly forgot himself. and smiled. Then the flying fish unhooked his wings and tied them around his friend's neck, and the sad little fish flew up toward the sky and sat down to rest on a branch of a willow tree that lived beside a little pond. For a while, he was almost happy being a bird. But by and by, he began to get rather melancholy again and sang a very sad song to himself that went something like this. Way down in the sea, as snug as can be, a fish he can swim round all day. He's much happier there than a bird in the air who must always be flying away. And then more of Helen's prose. He got sadder and sadder, and all the birds who lived in the neighborhood tried to comfort him, but it was no use. And then all of a sudden, he remembered that he really wasn't a bird. So he flew back into the ocean and returned the wings to the little flying fish and explained that he was through being a bird. Then he went sadly to his rock and sang a sad little song to himself that went very much like this. Oh, I want to be, instead of just me, a bird that can swim in the sea, or a fish that can fly up into the sky, as happy can be. And then it concludes with this little bit of prose. And there he is now, sitting all by himself on the rock at the bottom of the sea. The other fishes swim by sometimes and try to cheer him up, but nobody seems to be able to help him anymore. So there it is. And I can truthfully say that I'm very, very sorry. It won't happen again. So that's Helen's little bit of writing entitled "He All Alone Bewept His Outcast State," which I think is an iambic pentameter, the title anyway.
It is just so funny. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
paper she wrote for a professor at a university.
I guess, yeah.
How funny.
Undergraduate, it says.
How funny. I mean, well, it just doesn't seem like the kind of person that Helen is, from the stories that I've heard, that she would. I mean, this is like a children's story. This is
Mm-hmm.
like I could see an illustrated children's story just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
this. And I think maybe one time we shared about a Disney cartoon. I think it was a Disney. Maybe it was the other Max Fleischer's. Anyway, it was about a little what was it? A little mouse who wished that he could fly. And so he wished and wished he could fly, and a fairy came and gave him his wish. And so he had wings and he could fly, but then none of the other mice um, liked him. They were scared of him. And so he went to the bats, because they were like flying mice, but they were scared
Mm-hmm.
of him too. And it was like, I mean, it's the same kind of story, right? It's
Huh.
like nothing works when you try to change what you are. And the whole end of the story was, well, now we know there's no place like home. But that's kind of Helen's story here is, interesting. Anyway, I could just see this as a children's novel. So
Yeah. Well, metaphorically, it's like, well, the old grass is greener on the other side of the thought system, maybe. but but I think the ambivalence of Helen is very clearly, you know, portrayed here, as well as everyone else's ambivalence too, because we all think we want to be happy in the world, but we made the world so that we couldn't be happy. So there's a kind of schizophrenic, psychotic, crazy attempt that we all have made and are still making, apparently, to the degree that we are still not at peace with what we made up, and haven't reconciled that with what we are and how we were created, and
yeah,
shall forever be, just to wax slightly poetic. Yeah.
exactly. Okay, I'll read on.
Okay.
Okay. Ken continues. That same theme of interpersonal conflict was graphically expressed in several dreams. A representative one, the other seemed to be considered later, concerned a bird that could not make up its mind whether its color was blue or gray, or whether it was even a bird at all. The bird's strange and convoluted mental as well as behavioral gymnastics in attempting to deal with its precarious life situation were reminiscent of how Helen herself dealt with her own conflicted life situation. The dream came, incidentally, in 1940, when Helen was 31 years old. As was her custom, Helen wrote the dream down as if it were a short story. Okay, and this is the dream, the blue-gray bird. This story begins with the line, "Once upon a time there was a bluebird," which is only partially true. It would be more accurate to say, "Once upon a time there was a bird who told everybody that he was a bluebird. In fact, he was gray." Since this was perfectly obvious, people got the impression that the bird was somewhat confused, but this was not the case at all. It seems that the bird lived at the time of the American Civil War. It was often called the war between the blues and grays. Wow. He was especially concerned about the final outcome, but he had no way of predicting which side would win. And so he felt it would be safest to prepare for either eventuality. Being a gray bird, he reasoned, the best thing to do is to adopt the position of being blue. Then, if the grays win, they will say, "This bird is gray, even though he insists that he is blue. As long as he is really gray, what difference does it make what he thinks he is? We will not hurt him." On the other hand, if the blues win, they will say, "This gray bird evidently believes that he is blue. As long as he thinks he is, what difference does it make what he really is? We will not hurt him." Meanwhile, the bird was living in a dry and rotting tree, entirely leafless from endless battles. The branches were broken, the roots were shriveled, and the trunk was tilting precariously.
Perilously.
Perilously. It was, however, the only tree left standing after so many years of war, so the bird did not know where else to go. In order to maintain his equilibrium in the tree, the bird was compelled to lean increasingly in the opposite direction to compensate for the sagging of the branches. As time went on, he became quite lopsided, so much so that he would no longer have been able to keep his balance in a straight tree, even if he ever managed to find one. This, however, did not concern him too much, since the chances of him finding a straight tree were rather remote. This is a dream. What really bothered him were certain contradictory elements of the whole situation, which he found very difficult to reconcile. He recognized that when a bird is in difficulty, it flies away. Yet here he was, a bird who, in spite of very difficult living conditions, had not only failed to fly away, but had not even tried to do so. It was possible, he thought, that he was not really a bird at all. This, of course, would account for his not flying away. But it would also mean, this is amazing, it would
Uh-huh.
mean that nobody could seriously regard his basic problem as primarily a difficulty in color perception, which would leave him as poorly equipped to deal with peace as with war. Perhaps, fortunately, under the circumstances, he had to admit as a practical bird that managing to live through the war was probably the most he could handle. Armies from both sides kept appearing from nowhere and smashing at each other under the tree. The blood-drenched ground shook under them, and the noise was ear-splitting. They were probably unaware of the bird in his tree, but the effects on both were devastating. Knowing that the tree could not possibly last much longer, it was probably pointless to worry about what would become of him in a hypothetical peace.
Wow. Boy, talk about the metaphoric dream, huh?
That's like a minefield of
Mm.
metaphors.
Mhm.
Oh my.
Wow. That's really interesting.
That is just amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, this was when she was 30. Is that what he
I
said?
think so. Let's see,
Yeah.
what was it?
Um,
Da, da, da.
and
When she was
she
31 years old. Yeah. Uh-huh.
okay.
Yeah.
She hadn't gone to school to become a psychologist at that time yet. I don't believe. I don't think she did that until later.
Hmm.
But wow, it's just
Yeah.
so many things that I mean, we could spend a couple days talking about that. Um, Anything in particular stand out to
Oh,
you?
I well, the balance and the polarization and the fact there's like a blood-drenched battlefield with, ear-splitting noises. I mean, it's like, wow, I talk about, all the yeah, the trappings of the war that's going on in everyone's mind, having chosen the thought system of duality is, I mean, it's really an apt description. We're out of balance. We feel this sense of loss and fear of being on the wrong side, and we've got a plan that we hope will work no matter which side wins. So we're hedging our bets, and we're basically a double agent in two thought systems, and of course that tears us apart, and we have to compensate, and then now everything is lopsided. I was thinking of like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Well, this is like picturing the tree kind of in that orientation. In order to maintain the equilibrium in the tree, the bird was compelled to lean increasingly in the opposite direction to compensate for the sagging of the branches. Well, I mean, talk about the compensations that we all make for believing that our identity is here in the world. The course points out that this is exhausting. This is something that is the strain of constant judgment of ourselves and each other is virtually intolerable, it says. It's like, well, so that's huge. I mean, so Helen was really describing everyone's predicament, as Ken started at the beginning of this biography. It's like, this isn't just Helen's story, it's everyone's story. And we're all lopsided and feeling out of balance and incomplete, uncertain, lonely, and constant fear, and all those course type adjectives that describe our identification with an insane thought system, which it calls ego. Right?
Yeah, and it's so cool. I mean, it's like she was doing like a whole little self-analysis, because of course in our dreams the only it's not like it's coming to us from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Our dreams are coming to us from our own thinking mind, that is running around while we think we're sleeping, but it's the same. We're doing the same thing now. So I mean, it's no different than this sleeping dream that she had, except in the sleeping dream she was a bird, and
Yeah.
she had all these thoughts, and then she came to the thought of, maybe I'm not really a bird at all. Maybe that's not what I am at all, and that was what blew me away about this whole thing. It was
Mm-hmm.
all the symbolism and everything, but then coming to the place where not being able to identify with any part of it, she realized that it may not be what she is at all. It's a pretty amazing thought.
Yeah.
So
And that's where we're all coming to the same, effective realization of what if I'm not a person? What if that was made up? What if my real identity, just like everyone else's, is transpersonal? What would that change? Well, everything.
but I don't think she really thought about, I mean, she probably didn't know much about that kind of thing at the time. It had to have, if she was identifying that as herself, it probably was kind of scary.
Well, I'm sure her mind, brilliant as it was from the get-go, probably was relating to it, maybe without the advanced psychological jargon that she would become, competent and very familiar with, later, but if not already somewhat. It's like, but it's pretty much obvious that she recognized the conflict inherent in this metaphor, it would seem.
Yeah. And I'm sure later on it probably came to her and she was like, oh, I get that now. Maybe. I'm probably pretty sure she did. So she went,
Yeah. I mean, in so many places, Ken points out that Helen was no dummy, and she understood perfectly what the course was saying. She just didn't always want to apply it, which again is everyone's predicament, because I think that's why a lot of people intuitively just shy away from even opening the book, as I did for a number of years, because it was in my mom's household for quite a while, and I finally just, there's several friends that were reading it, and I thought, well, I'll give it a look see, and then I realized, oh my gosh, this isn't just a rehashing of a some kind of Christian dogma. No, this is it's a whole different thing.
Way different.
Yeah, I mean, it had some of those Christian sounding words in it, but it's like, nope, I think it's saying something different here. Way different. I mean, even from the first page,
I know it. Right when I read the first.
nothing real can be threatened. Nothing
Yeah,
unreal exists here unless the piece of God. Okay, you had me there.
me too. And I knew that was true because of my earlier studies, as I'm sure you too, from
Hmm.
Baird
Hmm.
Spalding and
Yeah.
Chogram Trungpa and all the teachers that we had that told us this. Now here is a book right here in English language that says the very thing. It's like, oh,
Hmm.
okay, this got to be true. So wow.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, you want to read on?
Sure. Sure. Helen's way, and then now this is Ken's commentary. Helen's way of dealing with her, quote, blue-gray, unquote, God ego identity crisis was essentially to accept the conflict as real, deny the spiritual side that connected her to God, and cope somehow with the issue of her ego self-survival in a, quote, blood-drenched, unquote, battlefield of a world in which she knew there was ultimately no hope. The rotting tree in which the bird lived represented Helen's self-concept. And elsewhere, I know Ken, if not the course itself, refers to the body as a rotting prison, which certainly is the poster child of that rotting self-concept, right? Of that we know it's not going to work, and it's doomed and an inevitable failure to identify with the specific, and yet that's we've all done. That's kind of our rite of initiation and our price of admission for coming into this world, is we've without almost without question assume the identity of a specific self, a this, and whatever this we've adopted is kind of like her previous dream, the putting on the wings as a fish. we think that's artificial, but we've all adopted a false persona that is a separate one, and that's what the course is saying. That's the rotting self-concept, right? Anyway, I'll read that sentence again. The rotting tree in which the bird lived represented Helen's self-concept, and the perilous status of the tree's life reflected her own perceived vulnerability living in this world. The bird's becoming lopsided in his attempts to compensate for the leaning tree suggested Helen's recognition that her own attempts at adjusting to her perceived life situations were also lopsided and quite maladaptive. It was one of Ken's favorite words, the maladaptive solution to the non-existent problem, which he calls his little short, terse, but very vivid description of everyone's ego. There is, as A Course in Miracles would later teach, no way out of such a dilemma unless the basic conflict itself is raised to awareness and questioned. And it was this questioning that Helen feared, for it meant the end of her world as she knew it. now,
REM song.
What's that?
Like an REM song. It's the end of the world.
Exactly. And also the title, one of the several titles of my brother's survival novel, Teotihuacan, The End of the World as We Know It. It was one of the titles of his book, which began as, let's see, the gray 90s, I think, and then there was something about Y2K, and then it morphed a few times, but anyway.
Yeah, and the world never ended any of those times. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
What were we thinking?
Well, of course, maybe another question from a different angle would be, did the world ever happen?
Yeah. So there you go.
But that's one that nobody wants to ask, right? Yeah. So there's just a couple little bit more for this whole introduction here. And it was this questioning that Helen feared, for it meant the end of her world as she knew it, a fear we shall return to in a later chapter. Thus, all her defenses were aimed at keeping this conflict out of awareness and her ego self secure. Indeed, as mentioned above, Helen's life was characterized from early childhood by the conflict of these two selves, symbolized in the strongly ambivalent nature of her relationship with God and Jesus, not to mention with the Roman Catholic Church. The following chapter presents a synopsis of these early years, highlighting Helen's, quote, search for God, unquote. And I can't help, but be inspired by how much this second reading, even though we're only on page 25, is fulfilling my expectations. Is the first time through, I was kind of reading this more as a biography. Now I'm reading it more as my biography and everyone's biography. And I think having just finished a wonderful dream class, I guess it's been a month or so now ago, and we've had some social events with the teacher here locally, just wonderful couple. And anyway, his whole premise of looking at dreams is a threefold ideas. One is that everyone in your dream represents a part of yourself. And secondly, that our daytime experience is just as validly applicable to dream analysis as our nighttime so-called nocturnal dreams. And then thirdly, that we all have help all the time in navigating through and out of our dreams. He would have phrased it slightly differently, but that's kind of the gist of what I got from this several month class. And so we all, a small group, we talked about our dreams, both waking and nighttime, and we helped each other look at the symbolism, but also more importantly, just the recognition that we all have the capacity to see things differently, and with that help. So anyway,
Oh,
but
that's great.
yeah, I just think that kind of fits so nicely now going through this. Oh, I think probably at least a decade later for me rereading this, it's meaning so much more to me,
I love
and
it.
hopefully to anyone else who's listening. So
All right. So I guess we'll go to chapter 2.
that sounds good. Yeah.
So chapter 2, Heaven and Helen, the early years. The early years. Helen's God-ego conflict was symbolized in the religious attitudes of her parents. As discussed earlier, however, these early experiences and parental attitudes are not causative, but simply reflect the different expressions of this conflict. Helen's chemist metallurgist father, which, I didn't even realize her dad was a metallurgist. I used to work in a metallurgical laboratory with Ph.D. metallurgists. Now I know they're nuts. So, I mean, some of the strangest people I ever met were doctors in metallurgy. So
So did you get to test your metal, so to speak, in
I
that
did. I did thousands of experiments with all sorts of interesting metallurgy and learned a lot about metallurgy. Geez whiz. Yeah, anyway.
Did you, I have to ask, did you listen to heavy metal music when you worked there?
No, I maybe a little,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
maybe a little Led Zeppelin, but
Couldn't resist.
let me see what else. No, okay. Uh, so anyway, Helen's chemist metallurgist father, Sigmund Kohn, was half Jewish. His mother was Lutheran, but as uninvolved with religion as one could be, having what certainly appeared to be a totally objective non-interest in the subject. Helen's English mother, Rose, was also half Jewish, her father having been trained as a rabbi, but she bitterly resented her Jewish roots and spent most of her adult years as a spiritual seeker, being involved in many different, if not always traditional expressions of Christianity. So again, I had not realized that Helen's parents were not like Jews. They were both half Jewish, and neither one of them practiced the religion at all, it sounds like. So my idea that Helen was in a Jewish family that had a lot of Jewish influence, may not have been as accurate as what I thought. In fact, it seems like they kind of were rejecting that, or at least her mom. Excuse me. So during Helen's early years, the family had a German governess, Miss Richardson. Helen and she were quite close and shared a secret. Miss Richardson was a devout Catholic who said her rosary regularly, and Helen was attracted to the almost magical quality of the blue beads and the prayers that accompanied the daily ritual. However, Miss Richardson told her she could not have a rosary because she was not Catholic. Oh, this just breaks my heart. I have like 4 rosaries sitting here. I would have gave her one. Moreover, every Sunday morning, while ostensibly going to the park, they would go to a Catholic church, which Helen later described as being for her then one of the most beautiful places I ever saw in my whole life. Again, not being Catholic, Helen was told she could not go in, and so she would wait in the vestibule until Mass was over. Yet Helen yearned to be inside. So she could only look through the window or look through the door, and she couldn't be in there. It's like, wow. I can just imagine the yearning for that, to seeing something magical and mystical and beautiful and not being able to access it because of, not being a Catholic. I mean, that breaks my heart. It's very sad.
I'm flashing on a song that my mom used to sing when I was a kid with slightly revised lyrics. If you replace doggy with religion in the song, how much is that doggy in the window?
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh. But I don't know. I don't know what your spiritual life has been or situation, but if you've ever been into some of these Catholic churches, and especially in New York, there's some just amazingly gorgeous, um, with the statues and everything. It's just the most beautiful and magical place.
Sure, sure. No, I haven't been in a lot, but a few that I've been in have been pretty amazing. Like there's a cathedral in Toledo, Spain, and when we're going in, and places like that, they're just incredible architecture, and then just it's obvious that some of the traditions in terms of the architecture and the well, the geometric knowledge and the construction expertise that's was obviously evident in that era to make these structures that have lasted centuries and anyway, it's pretty impressive.
It is.
But to me, well, I was actually kind of thinking about something I hadn't read or noticed in the first reading, decade give or take ago, of Helen's parents sort of paralleled my experience too with my father was not involved with religion as anyone could be, but he certainly embraced enjoying the outdoors and having worked with physicists as a cyclotron supervisor. He instilled both a love of the outdoors but also of science. But my mom was very much interested in something other than traditional Christianity, even though she dragged us around to Protestant churches when we were adolescents, until she finally gave up on that approach and dove headlong into metaphysical studies of different sorts. But so yeah, I mean but there was always that conflict. Fortunately, it was a friendly one. In fact, my dad, who on the surface poo-pooed my mom's metaphysical interest, and her group that would meet every week in our living room growing up, and continued up until just a few years ago. Decades of involvement and wide variety of people that entered our home for metaphysical study. The one incident that sticks in my mind is that the good-naturedness of my dad, even though he was somewhat agnostic to all of that interest, was he lighthearted, not mean-spirited way at all. I remember they watched he watched or recalled just like a half-star movie from the 50s called Fire Maidens from Outer Space. And at one point he jokingly called my mom's metaphysical study group that. And the only thing wrong was that it backfired, and they really liked the name. And so they called themselves that for quite a while.
Fire maidens. Yeah, I would go for that too. I
Fire
would be
maidens from outer space. Yeah. Anyway, they thought that was great fun. They liked it.
oh my gosh. That is funny. That is so funny.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
But
So
but there was two, the two influences in my life as it was in Helen's. And I'm sure it's probably true for a lot of people. We probably, on some level, all choose parents or, domestic situations growing up that express or reflect our own inner conflict in various ways. Right?
yeah, exactly. So I mean this is basically everybody. So
It's everyone's story, right? So,
yeah. So
yeah.
do you want to continue reading?
Sure. Let's see. Yeah, Helen, you're to be aside. Okay. And then this is Helen's comments here. There's a footnote at the bottom of this page. I'm going to read. That was, let's see, footnote number 7, which is where? Gosh, I'm trying to find where that. Oh, there it is. Miss Richardson's. Okay, this is a footnote for Miss Richardson, which says that at least this was the name given her by Helen in her autobiography. Helen always had a phobia against using people's correct names. See below pages 240F. And so in the autobiography, no true name is given for anyone, and her parents' names are never stated. I supply the actual names here except for the governess, whose real name I never did learn, although she was not English as Helen had reported. Okay, so now Helen's commentary now continues. I could see the flowers and the candles and the statues through the little space between the 2 large doors of the Catholic Church. Sometimes I heard music and a man's voice saying things I did not understand. There was a lovely smell too. Once I sneaked round to a little chapel on the side of the church. There was a statue of a lovely lady there, Mary, with light around her head and flowers and candles in the little garden in front of her. Everyone there had beads like Miss Richardson's. I wanted to stay there, but decided not to because I was afraid Miss Richardson would not approve because I wasn't a Catholic. But I made up my mind to be a Catholic when I grew up so I could stay as long as I liked. And then Ken continues, a Catholic friend of Miss Richardson was also a governess taking care of a Catholic girl. The girl and Helen became friends, and she spoke to Helen about the advantages of being Catholic, of praying to God and the Blessed Virgin and receiving what you wanted. Moreover, Helen was told, unless one were Catholic, one would burn in hell. Panic-stricken at this thought, Helen spoke to Miss Richardson, who suggested she speak to her parents, since children, quote, generally have the same religion as their parents do, and maybe they could explain things to me, unquote. However, she attempted to comfort Helen by telling her that she need not be afraid of hell because she would pray for her. Well, there we go. There's certainly a dose of traditional religion there. Huh?
Yeah, very sweet. Terrify the child and then tell him, don't be afraid. I will pray for you.
Well,
Oh my God.
I'll help you become gray if you're caught on the blue side and vice versa. Referring back to her prior
Yeah.
story. Yeah.
Yeah. So sad. Really. I mean, honestly, this poor little girl, um, just put in this situation where she longed for something. And of course, it's just it's like the forgotten song. It's like we just had a lesson a few days ago where we were talking about, remember what it felt like to be, at home and with God and hearing that melody and all that stuff. And this is everybody's longing to be with God. But for her, it was in a uh, very physical presentation to her.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a beautiful place that you cannot enter because you are not worthy, because you are not Catholic. And oh, by the way, you're also going to burn in hell.
Yeah, just give me an asbestos suit and I'll deal with it, right?
Yeah, that is not something you tell a little girl. You know,
Mm-mm.
little children don't need to hear this stuff. It always amazes me because people will say, well, how do you tell your little children about the course, or how do you talk about the course? you don't you want to scare them by telling them the world's not real? Well, no, I want to scare them by telling them that they're going to burn in hell forever, and that there's a magical God there that you can talk to, and he may or may not listen to you. And by the way, he sent his own son to be killed just for you. So
Yeah, there's a scary story right there. Huh?
nice story. And then the stories that they tell children, the church tells these children these stories that are just horrific. These Bible
Mhm.
stories about the guys that went into the fiery furnace, and I mean, just horrible, terrible things happened to people in the Bible, and they use it as, well, here, this could happen to you too, and why we would want that.
Well, as
Other,
you're saying that, Lynn, I was thinking, every experience that we have in this world that we take at face value and assume that there can be some reality ascribed to our material experiences, they're all equally illusory. I think it's so easy to forget that because our comparative judgmental mind that the ego, indulges in and lavishes so much attention on, it's constantly making comparisons and judgments and saying, well, this experience is better than that. Being dismembered by wild animals is better than or is worse than going out for ice cream sundaes. Staying in Oregon is worse than moving to Arizona or vice versa. It's like all the things that cross my mind as I'm the last couple of weeks packing, ready to go and doing all this stuff, making arrangements and yada yada. And I'm thinking, you know, that wonderful line in lesson 182: 1,000 homes he makes, and yet none contents his restless mind. That's kind of been my little background mantra while I'm preparing to move to another state. And it's like, no, on one level, I'm looking forward to it. And I think we'll have some interesting things to explore and friends to meet and restaurants to check out and, flora and fauna to learn about and explore and, the whole gamut of stuff. Um, and at the same time, I'm realizing, well, it's just, a Titanic dream. And I'm just rearranging holodeck chairs once again. And,
that's
and,
right.
and it's not just places and people and things. It's the whole idea that specifics can be better or worse, but specifics are all made up. The natural state of our minds is pure abstraction, as the course puts it, and that's where peace is possible. And anywhere else, um, we're basically just like Helen. We're having a story of ambivalence that we've made a big deal about and made real, and we continue to make real. It's just not the Big Bang that was over long ago. No, we're continually exploding and separating, carving separate specific thises out of perfect oneness in our mind over and over and over again, a gazillion times a second. And forgetting this, it's just a crazy story.
A crazy story, and you can just move around in the story from one scene to another, and you know
Yeah.
what's always going to be the same?
Yep.
You.
And yet each specific then becomes our way back to our right minds if we ask Holy Spirit's help and say, help me look at this from that perspective, that it's all the same, equally forgivable, equally silly to identify with and say, this is my only identity. I'm a fish, or I'm a bird, or I'm a Helen, or I'm a Bruce, or I'm a Lyn. It's like, no, those are all made up. They're all fictitious characters in a colossal dream.
Colossal dream. Yep, exactly. So I'll continue reading.
Okay.
So the nanny told Helen to talk to her parents about their religion, because she said usually you're whatever religion your family is. But Ken says Helen did speak with her father about the subject, but was told that he did not believe in God and had no interest in religion, and that he felt that people should decide about religion for themselves. Helen asked him about her mother, who was not at home at the time, and he said that she had some sort of religion, but that he did not know much about it. It was obvious to Helen, however, that he did not think very much of it, and moreover was not particularly interested in it. Helen pressed on, and she and her father had one of those very few, quote, real talks, unquote, they had ever had. He explained to Helen that one could be religious without believing in hell, a relief to Helen, and that he did not think she had to worry about the subject. At Helen's urging, he then taught her a Jewish prayer, as Helen desperately wanted to be something, and being Jewish would have sufficed. The prayer begins with the words, Lord God of Israel. Helen quickly forgot the rest. Helen then asked again about her mother's religion and specifically whether she might become Jewish. But her father simply laughed and said, it was not likely. Helen seemed satisfied for the moment and happily returned to her room, armed against hell with her new prayer and the knowledge that she was Jewish. That night, while she, Miss Richardson, and said her rosary, this is Helen from her uh, recollections. That
Mhm.
night, while she, Miss Richardson, said her rosary, I said, Lord God of Israel, over and over to myself. I was very excited about being Jewish. I had suspected for a long time that there was something missing about me. And now that I was Jewish, I hoped everything would be all right. I did not mention my religion to my mother, though. Somehow I felt she might not like it. Oh my gosh. So Ken's comments. Oh, Helen was about 5 years old at the time. 5 years old, and she's asking about God and she's wondering about religion and she's wishing she had one and happy that she has one. 5 years old. I have a granddaughter who's 5 years old. I don't think she's thinking about anything like that. But that was Helen. So, okay,
Maybe
back.
maybe if the power was out and there wasn't any screens to look at for a while, then those things would come up, you know.
Maybe so. Yeah, you might be right. Um, okay, continuing. Helen was about 5 years old at the time, and a year or so later, Miss Richardson returned to Germany, promising Helen to continue to pray for her. Helen kept on reciting her prayer, but her faith in the power of the quote Lord God of Israel unquote to protect her ended abruptly when a feigned stomach ache designed to keep her mother from leaving her at night resulted in emergency, though totally unnecessary, appendectomy. Screaming Lord God of Israel as she was being wheeled into the operating room and anesthetized, Helen, in characteristic fashion, blamed God for the debacle. While recuperating in the hospital, Helen decided there was probably no Jewish God anyway, which was why her father stopped believing in him. And so there was no longer any point in her being Jewish. So that's pretty scary, pretending she had a tummy ache and ended up getting an appendectomy. That was not fun back in those days. They did not, they used ether to anesthetize people, and that's such a horrible anesthetic, but also just terrifying to a 5-year-old or 6-year-old to, have their, you know, trying to keep their mommy with them, end up going and having an operation. That's pretty awful too.
Mhm.
So during her hospital stay, Helen and her mother had a relatively rare conversation about religion, with Helen hoping that perhaps she would come up with a religious solution for her. Unlike her atheistic and detached father, Helen's mother was quite willing to speak openly on the subject, as Helen indicates. And this is Helen she writing. She said she was still searching, but she did believe in God, but she was not sure how yet. She told me all about her religions ever since she was a little girl. I was very much surprised to discover that she had once been mostly Jewish herself. She did not, however, seem to like Jews very much. My mother herself was now a theosophist. Theosophist, yeah. She tried to explain this to me, but I did not get very far with it. She looked calm and happy as she told me about it, and a sort of glow came over her face. I tried to understand what she was saying, but it did not make much sense to me. In answer to Helen's request, her mother then taught her a prayer. And Helen says, it was simple and fairly short, and she said it to me until I knew it by heart. Then she said she was very glad I was interested in religion and urged me to ask God to help me. She was certain that he would show me the way. She seemed to be having trouble in finding the way herself, but I did not like to mention this. After all, she was trying to help. She said that when we got home, we would say our prayer together every evening. I said I thought that would be very nice. We gave it up after a few days. I was not really sorry. I did not want to tell her, but never really believed the prayer was much good. I completely forgot it myself within a month. Oh my gosh. So so this is just interesting in her little life.
Mhm.
Helen's ambivalence towards God was expressed in another college composition where the protagonist, 6-year-old Elizabeth Jane, sounds very much like the child Helen of the autobiography. And so I will let you read God and Elizabeth Jane.
Okay. God and Elizabeth Jane. When Jane was 6, her father died, and her mother explained that God had taken him home. Now Elizabeth Jane loved God and was accustomed to having him do rather unaccountable things. So this didn't especially surprise her. But when she understood that she wouldn't see her father again until she got to heaven, she felt that while, of course, God did only what was right, he owed her some sort of explanation for this. Elizabeth Jane had always believed that God lived near the tall evergreen tree that grew in the garden behind the house, and that if she ever really wanted to talk to him about anything, she could find him there. She went into the garden now. Elizabeth Jane sat down on the grass under the evergreen tree, where she waited for God for a very long time. She watched the heavy cones that wept from the tree and listened to the wind that flew through the branches, rattling them against each other. But God did not seem to be in the garden that day. When the sky began to get dark, she got up and went slowly into the house. That night, Elizabeth Jane's mother came to kiss her good night, and as she sat down on the bed and took her daughter in her arms, and she sat down on the bed and took her daughter in her arms and cried. Then she put her into bed and kissed her, and told her to remember to say her prayers before she went to bed. Elizabeth Jane nodded gravely. Her mother tucked in the blankets and said, "Don't forget, darling," in a shaky sort of voice. Elizabeth Jane nodded gravely again. When her mother had closed the door, Elizabeth Jane lay in bed and thought about her father and about the tears in her mother's voice and about the evergreen tree. Suddenly, she remembered her promise to her mother. So she closed her eyes and folded her hands and said, "Dear God," and stopped. Then she turned over and went to sleep. So
Hmm,
there's quite a story, huh?
that is quite a story. Excuse me. Um, there's, I mean, it's a lot about disappointment and a lot about, uh, you pray to God, but you can't really count on him. It really reminds me of, I'm just going back and looking at where this started. Uh, so, so she wrote this when she was in college again, but probably in her undergrad. Um,
Mhm.
so uh, it does remind me of today's lesson because I feel the love of God within me now,
Mhm.
uh, where Jesus talks to us about, forget about all the things that you think about in this world and give up all your hopes and all your fears and all that stuff, and just uh, uh, quit quit wondering and thinking and hoping and imagining and thinking about the past and the future, and just drop all that, and come to your God with only empty hands, because that's the only way that you're going to feel the love of God. And that's what I feel like, the yearning, that if she had only known then what she knew later, that yearning for that connection with God, because she did it. I mean, you and I, we talk about it and we think about it and we hope for it and imagine it. She actually heard the voice of Jesus. She actually had made that connection in her lifetime. So, it just is, I mean, when you see that even from a small age, she was yearning for that, and she was looking for that in everything, and being disappointed by everything that came up. Um, you know, the course was really an answer for her that she was really seeking and couldn't even imagine she would find. So so beautiful. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, yeah, she obviously had some direct connection with that part of her right mind that well, I mean, but we all have that. It's just she was able to tune into that very clearly and demonstrated something that we all can do. As this book is explaining and will continue to explain, that we're reading about her life story. It's that ambivalence that we all have, and the fact that we're still trying to make the dead horse of the ego's thought system run around the racetrack and all the while knowing full well that it's not going to work. But we keep hoping that somehow the crazy ego thought system is going to produce the results we want, but we all know that it's not. And I think it's that knowingness that it was what tormented Helen, just as it does all of us, is that when we're honest with ourselves, we know that that's not going to work. And then but we project that out onto the world, and to the degree that we do that, we're just delaying the inevitable reckoning with the fact that we made this up. But that's the outer shield of oblivion of looking at all the things that we do in the world that become the deep, the decoy, the detour, the smoke screen for looking at the contents of our mind. But then with help from Holy Spirit to get past that outer shield of oblivion, which is the world's dream, we have to look at the secret dream, which is we secretly believe that we pulled off the separation from our Creator and from each other, and that's equally untrue and therefore forgivable. But we all need to look at that, each of us, until we come to that realization that it's like it's just a silly, non-derisively laughable dream that we can forgive ourselves for, right? So.
Absolutely. And that's, I guess, what we're here for. And I love it that, we're in the 180 lessons, and you were talking about 182. 181 is my favorite lesson of them all.
There's some great ones there, huh?
That, 180, 189, that we're on now. It's just always so beautiful and perfect. So so thank you so much, Bruce Rawles.
Likewise, Lyn
I have
Johnson.
thoroughly enjoyed this.
Me too. I knew this would be a fun read, but I'm just, like I say, applying it to this is my projection, just like everyone else's. So Helen's story really is all of our stories, and I think that in that context it becomes so much more meaningful, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's why we're reading. I mean, I'm really grateful that we're reading it. Thank you for joining me.
Likewise.
We will see you next Saturday. Are you going to still be in Oregon, or?
I will be, and then I think it probably work out that I should be settled enough. Maybe, well, the following week is a question mark, but because we'll be moving in less than 2 weeks. But I'll keep you posted. But anyway, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to just unpack my laptop and be ready for the Saturday morning after arriving the night before. But we'll see. So,
All right.
yeah.
You always find a way. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Likewise, Lyn. Have a
All
great
right.
weekend, you and all.
Have fun packing.
Oh, we will. We are.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now. Thanks.